Racist cops arrest black judge. What happened next is shocking. Racist cops arrest black judge in her own courtroom during high-stakes case. What happens next will drop your jaw. ***, we want to know how you feel about this story, so don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Imagine this. You walk into a courtroom seeking justice, only to witness the unthinkable, justice itself being silenced. What would you do if the very person sworn to uphold the law was arrested just because of the color of their skin? It was an ordinary morning in the courtroom. Lawyers flipped through papers, jurors exchanged anxious glances, and the audience buzzed with anticipation for a high-profile case that could set a precedent for years to come. At the center of it all was Judge Naomi Carter, a highly respected black judge known for her no-nonsense approach and unwavering commitment to justice. But what happens when the very person protecting the system becomes its latest victim? What if the one responsible for deciding your fate is dragged away in handcuffs, right before your eyes? That's exactly what happened when Judge Carter prepared to hear the case of State v. Grantham, a case involving police brutality and systemic racism. The evidence was damning and the stakes were sky-high. As Judge Carter entered the courtroom, a hushed silence fell. She adjusted her robes, scanned the room, and nodded firmly to the bailiff to begin proceedings. But just as she was about to take her seat, chaos erupted. Two uniformed officers stormed into the courtroom, their presence as jarring as thunder on a sunny day. "Judge Carter, you're under arrest," one officer barked, his tone dripping with disrespect. Can you imagine the audacity? What could possibly justify such an arrest? And in her own courtroom no less. Judge Carter's face remained composed, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her disbelief. "On what grounds?" she demanded, standing her ground. The officers exchanged a smirk that sent ripples of anger through the courtroom. "For obstruction of justice and contempt of court," one sneered. The gallery erupted into gasps, shouts, and cries of outrage. Her defense attorney, Ethan Morales, immediately stood. "This is absurd. Judge Carter has done nothing but uphold the law. What would you do if you witnessed this? Would you speak up, or would fear keep you silent?" The officers ignored the protests, moving toward Judge Carter with handcuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights. For a moment, the room froze. Even the gavel in the bailiff's hand seemed suspended in time. "Let me remind you," Judge Carter said firmly, "you're attempting to arrest a sitting judge in her own courtroom. Are you prepared for the consequences?" But they weren't listening. They cuffed her, their grip tight enough to leave marks. What would it feel like to watch the very symbol of justice being humiliated right before your eyes? As Judge Carter was dragged out, her eyes locked with those of the defendant in the high-profile case, a young black man accused of resisting arrest. His future now seemed bleak, his hope extinguished. In the hallway, a journalist caught wind of the situation and began recording. "Judge Carter, do you have any comment on this?" she asked, shoving a microphone into her face. Judge Carter, still composed despite the handcuffs digging into her wrists, replied, "This is what happens when you challenge a system built on prejudice. Would you share this video if it went viral? Would you demand accountability?" By the time Judge Carter was booked into jail, the video had gone viral, racking up millions of views. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, calling for her release and for the officers to be held accountable. The police chief tried to defend his officers, claiming they were just following protocol, but the cracks in their story soon became apparent. Judge Carter's legal team worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. It turned out the officers had a long history of complaints regarding racial profiling and abuse of power. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate move to intimidate a judge who dared to hold them accountable. Would you stand by and watch, or would you join the fight for justice? The public outcry was unrelenting. Thousands flooded the streets, carrying signs that read, "Justice for all and no one is above the law." The protests reached a fever pitch when a whistleblower from the precinct came forward with damning evidence. Emails between the officers mocking Judge Carter and plotting her arrest as a lesson to teach her. What if your silence made you complicit? Could you live with that? The case reached the governor's office, and under immense pressure, an independent investigation was launched. The officers were suspended, and Judge Carter was released after 48 harrowing hours in custody. But the fight was far from over. Judge Carter, now a symbol of resilience, held a press conference upon her release. "I want to thank everyone who stood by me," she said, her voice strong but heavy with emotion. "This isn't just about me. This is about every person of color who has been silenced, intimidated, or brutalized by a system that should protect them. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Would you give up or would you fight?" The investigation revealed systemic issues within the police department. The officers involved were charged with abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Judge Carter was vindicated, but not unscathed. She returned to her courtroom with a renewed sense of purpose. "I will not be intimidated," she declared in her first hearing back. "Justice is not a privilege, it's a right." Her words sent a clear message. The fight for equality isn't over, but it's a fight worth having. What if this story was your reality? Would you rise to the challenge, or would you let fear win? In the end, Judge Carter's ordeal sparked a national movement. Police departments across the country began reviewing their practices, and reforms were enacted to ensure accountability. But the scars remained, a reminder of how fragile justice can be when prejudice and power collide. So what would you do? Would you stand for justice, even when it costs you everything? Or would you look the other way, hoping someone else would? The choice is yours. Because as long as injustice exists, the fight isn't over.